Thank you, everyone. Really excited to be part of the London user group. This is my first time here, so really looking forward to the session. Also, thank you for the free pizza and beer. That really helps with the good evening. Okay, so today we're going to talk about building LWC components in the LWR framework. And I want to start off with talking about Experience Cloud runtimes, right? And before we start off, so that's just a quick introduction. So I'm a program architect here at Salesforce, been working with Salesforce for more than 10 years now, and been doing a variety of roles. So I was originally part of the tech and product, and then moved over to the services. And then recently, I've been helping our tech and product teams build the LWR framework with a lot of new out-of-the-box components. So I'm here to talk about that today. Before we get started, as you already know, forward-looking statement. So we will be talking about the future. I will be doing a recorded demo of some of our components which we've built for the next release. It's not generally available yet, so it's still, some of the demo is a little bit still flaky. So I hope you guys don't mind it. So yeah, please make your purchasing decisions on what's currently generally available. Okay. So with that, let's start off with a question, actually. So I want to ask the audience, how many lightning runtimes do we have in Experience Cloud today? Is it 1, 2, or 3? 3? Okay. Raise your hand, sorry, just so I can see. Some poll. Okay. 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. Okay. So the correct answer is 2, right? The reason for that is we have 2 runtimes. One is the Lightning Web Runtime, and then we have the Aura Lightning Runtime. Both of these are the only 2 Lightning runtimes. We did have a Visual Force runtime, which is not Lightning. So you're correct in the number of runtimes being 3, but the Lightning runtimes, we have only 2 today. So we have 2 of them, Lightning Web Runtime and then the Aura Runtime. So the Lightning runtime, you can only do Lightning Web components, no Aura components or Visual Force components allowed. In the Aura runtime, you can have a mix of both LWC as well as Aura components together. Okay, so going back to the Lightning Web Runtime, and I just want to talk about how it sits with the stack, the Salesforce stack. So you have the Lightning Web Runtime at the bottom, and then it leverages all of these different Lightning framework already, right? So you have the SLDS, the Lightning Salesforce design system for styling. Then you have the Lightning Web Components. Then you have the Lightning Web Security or Locker Service, as it's already called. So the Locker Service is useful when you're trying to protect your assets on the client side. It also helps makes use of Shadow DOM, which is really good. So okay, this is slightly a different way of looking at the runtime, right? So when you publish a site on LWR, it is slightly different. So when you publish a site on LWR, it is static, right? So we take a snapshot of your page, unlike Aura component or Aura runtime, and then it's the same Lightning Web Runtime. You have the experience pages, you have the Salesforce design system, you have other integrations to MarTech, Interaction Studio, content delivery. All of this is served statically to the client, to the browser, or to the mobile. This begs the question, right? I mean, if everything is static, then what happens to the CRM data? That needs to be dynamic, right? So that is dynamic. So all of the components are loaded to the client side statically, but then the data is still coming from the CRM and the CMS system. So that hopefully gives you an idea of how Aura runtime is slightly different from the Lightning Web Runtime. And as I go through few more slides, it will get a bit more, your understanding will increase. So this is the Lightning Web Runtime. I just want to talk, so there are 3 things here, right? So it's the industry's first component static site generator. And also, it's based around the modern JavaScript and open source with the LWC components. You also have, it's a developer experience driven, right? So it's for high scale developer driven experiences. I want to stress on the first point here, right? So it says industry's first web component static site generator, and what that means. So unlike Aura, where you publish a site and you have a bunch of LWC components, when you load a page in Aura runtime, each of the components are pulled in one at a time from the server directly, right? So it loads the components. In the LWR framework, it's kind of different. It just loads it from a CDN directly. So you're really taking a snapshot of your components, loading them. All your assets are already cached, so it is faster to load. So it is in line with something called Jamstack, which is geared to, and LWR sort of aligns with the Jamstack architecture model. So this is what it really looks like, actually. So you publish a site, we take a snapshot of all of your components, put that in the CDN, right? And all of your assets are also cached. So that way, when the components are getting loaded on your client, they're directly hitting the CDN directly to load your pages, and then the components on the client then fetch the data from Salesforce, right, on demand. And like I said, Jamstack model. Jamstack is an architectural pattern which actually relies, which makes use of having higher scale and higher, better performance for the end users. And Jamstack really stands for JavaScript, API, and markup. So this LWR framework is in line with the Jamstack pattern. Also, the Lightning web components, because they are sort of loaded, they're lighter in version, because the number of boilerplate coding, which when you compare it to Aura and LWC, it is less because the browser APIs have matured over time, and that is why LWC components in general load much faster. So this does have a positive impact on the performance of each of the components. And one other thing I forgot to mention is, if you might have a lot of custom components today, right? So you might have custom components, you might have managed package components from ISV partners. These components today, if you use any of those components in the Aura runtime, you don't need to republish anymore, right? So the latest definition of your LWC components are always loaded to your client. Whereas with the new LWR framework, because the way we are caching the page and taking a snapshot of all the component definitions, and the way it works, you will have to republish it. And that's something you need to keep in mind, right? Is whenever you have a new component definition, you make changes to your LWC, and you're using that in any of your community, you need to remember to republish your website. Okay, so all of this process, all of these things together has about a very good positive impact on the performance. Like I said, it's up to 3 times faster to its predecessors in Aura framework. And that is significant improvement. I do have some benchmark stats here, right? So we have three buckets here. So you have the Aura runtime and Aura components taking about 2.1 seconds. And this is to load both the data and the page together, right, on the client side. And then with the Aura runtime and the LWC components, it's slightly better. So it's about 2.08 seconds, but it's still there. It's a little bit slower. With LWR and LWC, so you can see 0.7 seconds, so 700 milliseconds to sort of load all of your data as well as the components rendered on your page. I just want that number to sink in a little bit, because that is a massive improvement in terms of the performance. And most of the use cases here are for high traffic websites, like like a B2C commerce platform, right? So where the volume is really, really high, and we need to address the performance needs. And the LWR framework is really geared towards performance, page load times, performance. And scalability. All of these 3 things are kind of in the foundation of a LWR framework. So now we understand what is LWR, why is it important, why is it better than its predecessors of Aura runtime. I'm going to share some thoughts and insights around developing LWC components, right? Given we are all a developer community here, and I thought we need to add some developer content. So that was the architectural content. Now moving to some developer content. So I'm going to talk about SLDS Grid versus CSS Grid. Now, people might have used this in your implementation. There's a lot of confusion around which is better, right? So do I use SLDS Grid or do I go and do CSS Grid? So we're going to talk about which one is better. We're also going to talk about experience bundle metadata for experience builder sites. And this is a new metadata, a way of deploying your sites through SFDX and your, experience builder sites. So let's start off with the first topic, which is SLDS Grid and CSS Grid. I'm going to take a pause, actually. So is there any questions so far? Happy to take questions along the way. No? All makes sense?
On that previous slide where you went from 2 to like about 0.7 seconds.
Yeah.
What's the secret? Is the secret sauce that you said that I think you said that the client side pulls the data from Salesforce, and so do you effectively load something on the client side that tells it all the data that's needed, even as you're still loading the static files? Is that how you?
No. So the page gets so the question is the page gets delivered statically through the CDN, but the content which is coming from your record data, for example, if you're loading a list of products or a list of records, that still needs to go from Salesforce. Either if you're using a wire adapter, then it goes to wire adapter and comes back. But because you're using the LWC framework, it's much faster. Yeah. Any? Yeah.
What if your LWC has some sort of inflexibility, data rendering in a certain way, but due to some interactive behavior from the user, something changed, you may need to reload it. They need to change to a different LWC that was sitting before. How is that handled?
Good question, Louis. So this is only for the initial load of the page, right? So only the initial load is faster. If the subsequently the component needs to behave very differently and it needs to load something very different, then yeah. So if you're, for example, can't think of an example on the fly, but yeah, it is going to take as long as it's going to take for the web component. But the initial load time of your components are faster.
So you build some stuff that's basically static. Don't build a lot of interactivity, otherwise it's static. No.
So no, that definitely goes on your on whatever you're trying to build, but it is still faster on the LWR framework because the components are already loaded on the client. Now, how quick is it? I don't have a benchmark stat for that because it really depends on the component and what you're actually trying to do with it. But generally, this is, yeah, take this with a pinch of salt, I guess. This is just for benchmark stats at this point. Really depends on what the component is doing, how heavy it is. Are you querying? Are you doing a SOQL query in the Apex, which is taking 10 seconds? I don't know. I'm making that up, but there's a lot of, it depends.
I guess that any increase you get from that would be represented in the Aura side as well anyway. So if you had dynamic Aura components, they'd be adding on top of whatever that first render is.
All the wires would go up.
Yes, yeah, I believe so.
Correct, yeah.
I think it stems from when you said that the speed increase is represented in both loading the component and the data. So I think the real question is data being loaded faster than in an Aura runtime?
I don't have a benchmark stat for that, but generally it is faster if you're using the wire adapter, for example, to fetch the data. It is still going to take the same amount of time for the LDS if you're using an Aura versus this, but the whole perceived performance on the page is going to be much, much faster with the LWR.
Can you mix and match? So if you have a digital experience site, can it be WLR and Aura, or does it have to be WLR only?
Very good question, actually. So I did forget to mention that earlier. So the runtime your community runs in really depends on the template you choose. Okay, so in one of the previous slides, I did have this. Okay, so here you can see two screenshots. Both of them are build your own. The one which is marked with the LWR in parentheses, and if you choose that template, that is when it's going to run in the Lightning Web Runtime. The other one, and I wanted to bring this specific example because both of them are build your own, that is going to run in the Aura runtime.
So in your Aura runtime, you can't put WLRs, or can you?
No, you can't mix and match them today.
So if I've got an existing terrible performing community using Aura, my only real option is to rewrite it recently, LWR, start again.
I wouldn't call it rewriting. So yeah, it's reconfiguring, or you can use custom URLs from your Aura side to point to a LWR site, and then you can move them around.
Still, then you're maintaining two sites still, huh?
Yes. Yeah. Really depends. I'm going to talk about the transition plan, which you should probably think about. We will talk about that. Okay, so let's go back to, where was I?
So is it all about the CDN, where that's located?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So if you had your instance and you had your experience cloud site coming from your whatever instance, whatever it is, then it would go fetch everything from there. But because you got the CDN distributed everywhere, then it's quicker to load components and stuff like that. Is that the general idea?
So the way to think about it is in the Aura runtime, each of the component is loaded on the page on demand, right? Whereas in the LWR world, the whole page is sent to the client directly, and that's why it's faster.
You can think about it as like in LWC, the JavaScript is being minimized and sent to a client, and then that's the static that is being captured on the CDN, rather than the Aura that each file, like each component individually, is being minimized and then rendered.
And your framework is being loaded, which you don't see.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? No? Okay. Okay, so let's talk a little bit around building LWCs in LWR. So these are some of the best practices. I think we talked about these two. So these are the two things we're going to cover. So let's talk about SLDS Grid or Flexbox as it is. We do have SLDS, but the actual implementation is based on Flexbox, and there's something to remember. So the definition of SLDS Grid is that it provides a flexible, mobile-first, device-agnostic layout system, and it features to control alignment, order, flow, and cutters, right? So if you look on the right-hand side here, so I've done I can probably do this. So I have a SLDS Grid here, but if you look at the display flex, that is what it means. It means it's using a Flexbox on its implementation. And that's, why is this even important, right? So think about this. This is important when you're trying to have a collection, right? So you have a collection of products, for example, which you want to show on your site. And you want to use them, you want to arrange them in a tile format, right? So product 1, product 2, product 3, and likewise. So you can use the SLDS Grid today, and that's the use case I'm trying to work on here, right? Okay, so we use Flexbox for SLDS Grid. The main thing to remember is that the Flexbox is one-dimensional, right? So it has a main axis. So you start putting your item 1, item 2, item 3. The thing to remember is that the content will shape the layout, right? And this is a key difference when you compare it with the other grid framework. And what that really means is that if I had the first item to be a large text or a large image, the content takes precedence over the layout of the grid. Okay, that is when you should be really thinking about using SLDS Grid. The box alignments are slightly easier. I would say the browser compatibility for both CSS Grid and SLDS Grid are on par, so there is very minimal differences here. When you compare this to the CSS grid, and this is slightly different, the way to think about it is, so I will have something called grid columns, and then I can add whatever I want in that one. The CSS grid is slightly different, so it's a two-dimensional. So you have both the horizontal axis as well as vertical axis here, right? And you can pinpoint, you can say, this item here, I want it larger, or I want it 10 pixels or 100 pixels, for example. You can control the exact size of each of these grid items. If you want the layout to shape your content, then this is a good choice for you, right? So just as an example, if I had a large text in the first one, it is going to somehow wrap into that, say, one box, because that is how the CSS grids are generally designed to work. Okay, so which one should I use, right? For my implementation, do I use SLDS Flexbox or do I use CSS Grid? It really boils down to whether you need one dimension or two dimension. And I just want to make it clear that just because it's two dimension doesn't make it better, right? Sometimes the one dimension is exactly what you really need. And if you want your content to shape your layout, then use Flexbox or SLDS Grid. If you want your layout to shape your content, then you will be using CSS Grid. And it's not just one or another, right? So you can mix and match both of these things together. So you can use the SLDS Grid and the CSS Grid together, right? So a classic example for this is you have a big page template, and you can use a CSS Grid, for example, to shape the content layout properly. And then within each of those layout, then you can add components which are using Flexbox, which makes it content, which kind of makes it flexible. So lots of ways, lots of discussion on the internet around this topic, so feel free to research. One thing I would like to highlight here is that if you use SLDS Grid, the advantage is that accessibility is for free, right? Your browser compatibility is for free because SLDS takes care of all of that for you. SLDS also takes care of any upgrades which happen in the future for the browser compatible browsers. So yeah, with SLDS, you don't have to worry a lot because everything is out of the box. But with the CSS Grid, although it's a better choice, it's two-dimensional than one, but you have to look after your own accessibility needs and everything else. You need to code for it. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to take a pause here. Any questions on SLDS Grid or CSS Grid?
So the, sorry, we say accessibility is taken care of. That's just on the grid structure, not on, you still got to make sure the content put in the grid is accessible. Absolutely, yes. Yeah, so if you use SLDS Grid, for example, SLDS adds a lot of properties on the component which makes it accessible, right? But although you need to specify your own accessibility stuff on top of it.
Do the standard page templates and custom ones and build them all use CSS Grid today? Because obviously some are like, they look like text box, so just 3 columns, and others you have your top and your left and right and your bottom.
Yeah.
So is there a combination used by Salesforce on these templates? Or do you only use CSS Grid for page templates really today?
So if we have a scenario where you want to do a grid, then generally we start off with the SLDS Grid because it's an easier win in terms of implementation. Because the cost of implementation is much lesser. SLDS, like I said, takes care of a lot of boilerplate stuff for you. If you use the CSS Grid, the development effort, your testing effort is much higher. So for Salesforce development internally, we do start off using, I think it depends on the use case, right? Like I said, go through this, and if it means one dimension is what you really need, then we use SLDS Grid. But generally, this is the decision tree you'll have to go through. Any other questions? No? Okay, so next I want to talk about leveraging experience bundle in JSON format. And this is a snapshot from my VS Code. here you can see, the way the bundle is organized is that there is an experience folder, and then you have the name of the community, and then there are views, and then I have selected, currently we are looking at the home.json, and this is what the JSON looks like. And this represents all the components on your page and all the properties for each of the components here, right? So here I have a component here, and there are a few properties here, right? So for example, item spacing, number of columns, and show pagination, for example. I just want to remind that this is not just for LWR sites. This is also available for Aura templates. Yeah. So you can to enable this feature, there is a in the settings there is a checkbox. You just need to enable experience bundles, and you can start using this today. Yeah, you retrieve metadata using your normal SFDX commands. IDs here generally don't matter quite a lot from our observation, so just leave that be there. One thing to remember is that if you redeploy, if you make a change on this file, the whole community is going to get redeployed, right? And that's just the way the publishing works for updating each individual JSON file in the community. And that's something to keep in mind. So let's suppose I just want to change the home file, home page. That just means you're still going to have to redeploy the entire site today. And like I was saying, the snapshotting and everything else, that means that you'll have to redeploy your entire site. One thing to also, there is a lot of helpful validation messages. So let's suppose I want to just change this property. I know for sure that I just need to update this one property from number of columns from 3 to 4. And I'm pretty sure that is what I exactly want. In the old way, you will have to go through the builder, declaratively set this on the builder page, and then you'll have to retrieve the SFDX and then redeploy again, right? With this one, with this kind of a setup, you can really go ahead and update this number to 4, for example. The good thing is we've added a tons of validation messages, which doesn't let you put the component in the wrong state, right? So especially the out-of-the-box components are generally, taken care of with the validation messages. So go ahead, feel free and update this. It's not declarative programming, but if you're really adventurous and you know exactly what you're doing, then that's one way to go about it. Any questions on the experience bundle?
Just one, not really a question, but I want to point out that the real value, the way I see it, is now the ability to version experiences through source control. Because one of the things that I always was a bit iffy about is the fact that when you make a change in the community builder, it saves. Which means you can't play around with things, you can't test things out, because every little change is permanent. So this gives you the ability to version, restore, just like normal code, which is going to be very, very handy.
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why it's also in the JSON structure, which makes it even more easier for you to do any devs if needed between different versions. Yeah.
So just for I've always been puzzled on lightning bolts. Are experience bundles superseding lightning bolts? Is it new name lightning bolts? Lightning bolts have nothing to do with this.
So lightning bolts, so LWR isn't supported for managed package as of today, right? But that is in the roadmap. And I'll talk about some of that limitations, and that's going to come up in that limitation slide. But yeah, no, it's not supported for managed packages today. Lightning bolts, I'm not 100% sure at this point. So let me come back to you with an answer on that one. I don't remember what's the current state of that one. So I'll come back to you.
Yeah, another question. So the bundles, is that just for Aura and LWR, or are they for the other experience type sites as well?
So currently it's only for the sites you built in Aura or LWR. Okay.
Do not say the V word here.
What is visual?
No, I think it's the standard ones you get that people often use in accelerators because you get certain components that only exist in those standard ones that don't exist.
Okay, well, LWR is, I'll go through, I don't have a roadmap slide, but there is a tons of things coming in the roadmap for LWR in the future. I want to talk about a little bit about the out-of-the-box components which you get in the LWR sites today, right? So, and these are kind of very different when you look at the Aura sites. So you have tons of all of these different image component, language selector, some of the layout content, as well as like banner, card, columns, overlap, and tile. I think somebody was asking me, so I think you can also run flows now in LWR, which is a Lightning Web Runtime. So you don't need to, this was in the previous release where, you can now run screen flows specifically in the LWR, which is very new. Previously, if you had to run a screen, if you wanted to have a custom component which had a screen flow in it, you had to wrap it in an Aura component, and then you had to write a LWC component on top. With this new addition, which means with this new flow component, you can really drag and drop any flow on the page, which makes it super.
Is that available for developers as well, or only in LWR communities?
So that's because you need a Lightning runtime. So you already have that component in the Aura template already, which runs in the Aura runtime. We now have a component which runs even in the Lightning runtime.
Is that generally available? Can I just use that in a Lightning Web component?
Yes, you should be able to. Yeah.
Can I look that up?
Absolutely. Yeah. Let me know if you don't find it.
I've checked it live.
Yeah.
No, this is something very crucial. That's why.
Dear to me,
Any other questions? No? Okay. So let's talk about that. So the idea of building some of the out-of-the-box components, right? So if you look at most of these components, I would say some of the components are missing. Some of the standard components which you find in Aura are not in the LWR templates today, but these are all coming in the future. These are all in the roadmap, which we're trying to bring them in parity at the moment. And then one of the things which is kind of different to the Aura components is that most of them have something called data bindings, right? So what you can really do is, if I, for example, have this grid component, I can tie it down to CRM data. So you'll have the component, you can wrap it with a data wrapper on top of it. So that feeds in the data to the component directly. And this is all declaratively on the builder as well, so which makes it super powerful. We will do a demo. I will show you a demo on the grid. So hopefully that data binding concept will be much more clearer as we go through the presentation. Like I said, screen flows can now be used for the process automation. So if you had screen flows, you can now run them on the Lightning runtime. Okay, demo time. Oh, go for it.
So some of those LWR components that you're saying are standard, similar features exist in the standard template flexi pages. Are they the same LWR components that are used in the standard templates to build those flexi pages? So things like columns, grid, they're all there in the standard templates.
Yeah, you mean the Aura templates, right? Or
Usually the big builder, Lightning builder.
oh, Lightning Builder, right? Yeah.
Are they the same LWR components that are used there?
So not these ones, definitely not, as far as I know. But yeah, the idea is that all of these standard components should be usable across all the different platforms, be it inside Salesforce or in the community.
Even the data binding with CMS, there's a standard component called, I think, CMS content or something like that.
Correct.
Where you can drag and drop that in the builder for your standard template-based site, and you can bind that to whether it's not
CRM data, yeah. The CMS data, yeah.
whatever it is. Is that the same? Is this the same as that?
Yeah. So short answer, no. These are two different components under the hood, but they do exactly what you're saying. So if you've used the CMS component in the Aura template, so this grid component is very similar to that. And I will go through the demo, so it makes it, you will see what it looks and feels like in the demo. But yeah, I mean, the general idea is that we're trying to make sure all of these components are used everywhere on the platform as much as possible. Any other questions before we demo? Okay, so let's do the demo. So for the demo, okay, so before we jump into the demo, so we are going to build up, it's a recorded video, so I'm not going to attempt to do a live, a live demo, right? So what I've done is, so what we're trying to do is, if you open up this URL, company leadership, this is what the page looks like. If you look here closely, these three are grid items, so they are using a grid. Item 1, item 2, item 3. So we will try to replicate this, build this site in less than about 5 minutes, right, as quickly as possible. Some of the pre-work I had to do was I am going to, like I said, I'm going to use data binding concept. So what I've done is we've created a leadership custom object, and we have this one list view called all leadership. And I have created 3 custom fields here called name, role, and an image key. And that image key is actually coming from the CMS system. So what I've done is I have uploaded these images in the CMS workspaces, Salesforce CMS workspace, and each of these images will have a content key, and that is the content key you just saw here, right? Okay, so with that understanding, so let's actually jump into the demo. Okay, so we see the leadership page here. This builder looks exactly similar to what you see on the Aura side. So I've dragged and dropped a grid component here. The grid component, and then there is a data source you need to choose. I'm going to stand here. So I've chosen record list data view. That is actually the name of the object, that is object, and I've chosen leadership object. I need to choose a record list, and I'm going to say all leadership. I'm going to adjust some spacing here. And now this grid component is back with that leadership object record list data. What I can then do is drag and drop a tile component. And this is not necessarily just the standard components. You can really drag any custom component in this one as well. So you drag and drop any component you like. And then each of those components can then get, you can then start modifying each one of the one on the left. And this is called a repeater component, right? So the first component here, whatever changes you make to the first component gets reflected on the subsequent tiles. So here I have updated the view bio, so you can see that all the changes I'm making is just for the first tile. And because it's a record list, it's going to keep repeating over all the different records. I'm still doing some more tile height adjustment. The next thing is I'm going to drag and drop, I think, some more tile height adjustment. Just a second. Okay. Then what we're doing here is, so now I'm readjusting, I'm pushing the text block from the top to bottom. You can see that reflected across all the repeated items. And now I'm choosing the source here, right? So here, because it's already connected to the data, I just had to select item.name, and then it pulled in the name for all of these different records, then the role, and then I'm going to now choose the image. So for the image, because I'm using the SFDC, the SCMS, Salesforce CMS, I need to type in this URL, but I'm using item key to sort of, the image key to sort of fetch the image for each of these repeated items. And so that is just the __C field. So you can see that it knows that this is where I need to pick the image from. I'm going to pick it for all the other things. So this is the preview page. So you can see now that the grid is just working straight away with the data connected to it. And then I change the number of items being displayed, so from to 20, and now I can see all the items being loaded here. You can see that again in the preview tab. You can see all the items are now loaded on the page. I'm going to do a few more tweaks to this grid component. So I'm going to say, let it be 6. Yeah, so I'm going to choose 6 as my initial load time, but this time I'm going to enable a pagination component. And what the pagination component lets me do is give me show more, right? So, and then you can also modify that component to have your own text. So here I'm going to do load more, and then the next time you preview it, you now get the load more. So every time you hit load more, because the page size is now set to 6, so it's going to fetch the remaining items, and at the end of it, the paginator component disappears. So you don't have the show more button again. This is how it looks on the mobile. So currently, it is a single column only. So all the components are loaded here. You also see the show more button. I think. Yeah. Okay, so you see the load more button, and then you keep loading, keep fetching newer record items to then display this. I think finally, I just, okay. So I said, you know what, I don't want 3 columns, I just want 4 columns is the new requirement. So you can just update that. You can now update the number of columns to 4. So now it just works with the 4 columns as well. So it was just super easy for us to build a grid component. So this grid component is actually using the Flexbox concept. So we are using the SLDS Grid to have all of these items rendered, styled, sorry. And that is it. So that was the demo. Like I said, this component is not GA yet, so this should be generally available looking forward at this point, of course, next release. Okay, so that was the demo. Any questions on the demo before we move on to the presentation?
So you have to put a URL in to display the images to get the CMS content? Is that?
Oh, that's just the way I had I could have just had the text field in the record to have that, but I didn't do it properly. So I just had the content key in the, so let's actually go back into this presentation and then I can talk about it. So is that? So the way we had, so yeah, if I had put in the URL here instead of just the image key, then I could have just put in URL, and that is what I would have come up.
I suppose my point was, if you had if you were developing a sandbox, that URL would be different to production.
Yes, the keys would be different.
So if you were using that experience bundle to deploy it, you would deploy a non-working site.
Yes, and that is, so that's a good question actually. So because all of this is record data, what I'm trying to show, right? And these URLs can be different.
I suppose where I was going with the question is there a way to make that URL dynamic based on the org you're in?
So not at this point. Maybe something we should be considering for the future. Yeah. That's a great idea, by the way. I really like that idea. Makes it easier to deploy and test it on sandboxes.
Instead of hard-coding the ID, reference to the folder structure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good idea. So we should definitely put that on the idea exchange. We'll get some points to it. Yes?
I guess linked to that question, and this is, I don't know, if you do have one digital experience site, is there any place that you can store settings particular to that site? Or are we saying that in general isn't possible?
So what kind of settings? Can you give us an example?
So if I had a custom object with some data in, and I wanted a site that was pointing to one record, and so it was a digital experience, I was going to take that digital experience site and use a copy of it and point to another record, are
Yeah.
there any ways of effectively configuring the site so you've got the same, everything the same apart from I'm choosing a different record that I point to. So,
So if I understand your question properly, what you're asking is I have two different sites, but then I just have one record source, and I want to point to that same record source regardless of what environment or what site I'm asking it to load from.
no, imagine you had a site for this user group
Yeah.
in London,
Yeah.
and you wanted exactly the same, another copy of the site that's for one in Birmingham or Manchester. And you say, I want exactly the same functionality, I just want to point to different records. Is there a way of picking up a site and putting it down, but just changing the records that it points to?
Okay, that's it's a great question. So what you're asking is something called page variations and audiences, which you can create in the experience builder. That is currently possible in the Aura sites, but that is still not available in the LWR sites until it reaches parity. But that is possible. You can point it to different pages based on audiences.
But you can just download your site with SLDS
Yeah.
and deploy it. Like do whatever change you want and deploy the whole thing.
Yes.
The second community is a copy of that community.
Yeah. I'll check with you after.
Yeah. So that is possible. That is. I'm going to talk about that in the limitations next. But yeah, that is one of the limitations. Currently, you can't do page variations and audiences today.
You just configure the second site to use a different list view.
Mm-hmm. Or you can have two different components on the page as well. Okay, let's catch on. No problem. Yeah. No, that's fine. Any other questions? No? Okay, so we did the demo already. So I'm going to talk about the limitations now, right? So there is a Salesforce documentation which gets updated per release or frequently. So definitely have a look at this link. So there is a LWR template limitations right now. They fall under 4 categories today, right? So unsupported features and settings. One of them is the audiences and page variations are not currently supported in LWR. However, they are coming in the roadmap, forward-looking statement at this point. Progressive rendering isn't available in the LWR sites. LWR workspaces limitations, so you don't have moderation, content management like your topics and everything else. Gamification is also currently not supported in the LWR framework. Experience builder, you don't have undo and redo button, which is there in the Aura sites today. And then there are some lightning blocker limitations, specifically around the document and the window properties. Few of them are not supported. So have a look at this documentation. Each one of them for the lightning blocker limitations, I know there are a bit of workaround you can do. But yeah, some of these are still in the roadmap and forward-looking. We would have that in the product soon.
Do you have any indicated dates?
I don't have the roadmap slide, unfortunately. Something I will pick up. A good question, so I'll bring that next time.
Considering Rich's DevOps predicament,
Mhm.
if you wanted to change something in dev for the experience builder or an LWR site or whatever, and then move it through the pipeline, do you hit issues there? Because it's based on list views with CMS and stuff,
You
isn't
need to
it?
deploy the whole site, not just the delta. So if your deployment is just the delta, then it's not going to work for you. You need to deploy with SFTX the whole site and then publish it.
So if you built in CMS all the list view content, you want to show different audiences, it doesn't work with it.
If your source of truth is your DS code and your deployment is best, like is used with APIs of SFTX, like metadata, that's what you're using for your deployment. You have to deploy the whole thing, like the top folder. You have to deploy the whole thing. Otherwise, it's not, because of the way it minimizes and renders JavaScript all together, compiled it all together.
Yeah.
Today, isn't it?
So
Our team don't even bother. It just change it all in production.
Yeah.
It's too hard for them to do it in the sandbox. That's much better.
Especially with CMS. CMS is the experience bundle is only exploiting the site. It's not exploiting the CMS records as well. So you have to do that with a separate deployment.
Most people tend to just do it in production.
Yeah. At the moment.
That's a good question.
But-
Marketing.
But then download it again to your master branch or your main branch, save it with it. You know, you'll be able to check
Yeah.
production.
So you raise a good question here, right? So you're talking, so Amar, you're telling us about a component, but it actually relies on recordless data, which is actually record data, not metadata. And how do you go through the pipelines, right? So that's a good question, and I don't have an answer for that. So you will have to work around for that at the moment. So you'll have to create them either using bulk uploader or some other tools to sort of push them from one environment to the other. But yeah. That's something to keep in mind as well. Good, very good question. Yeah. Okay. So summary, right? So we've talked a lot about LWR. So we've talked a lot around what are the different Lightning runtimes we have, Aura versus LWR, and how LWRs are much more faster with the page loading times. Oh, sorry, I've repeated that. And then we've talked around the Lightning Web Components. One thing I would suggest is if you're still developing components, and there will be a lot of cases where you're writing components for your custom components, please write them in LWC. That way your transition to LWR tomorrow is going to be much more easier, right? So if you get away from using Aura components, unless there are some limitations, of course. Keep in mind with the limitations, these limitations keep getting updated per release or more frequent than that. So definitely check the limitations before making an implementation. So that you might still choose Aura template, and that is not a bad thing, because of the limitations. But once we hit the parity, then definitely start thinking about using LWR a bit more. Okay, so last few slides, and I'll ramble through them. So this is a resource slide. One thing I want to highlight is the learnexperiencecloud.com, right? So if you don't know about this slide, I would bookmark that slide straight away, because that has tons and tons of material around a few blog posts and everything else.
Can you put it in our group, please?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, I will do that. Another thing is around the Experience Cloud events. So we had one event, Ask the Expert session today, actually at 6 p.m. And it's UK friendly time zone as well. So please join this. We will have some experts join these calls, and they will be more than happy to help with your questions. Yeah, all the other ones are, let you have a look at those ones. Putting in a cheat sheet as well for some of your high volume. So the way the LWR is designed is primarily for high volume traffic and everything else. So there's a cheat sheet. I'll attach this to the slide. Again, when we talk about performance, right, so keep in mind that, it's not just the number of users who are trying to log in. There's a lot of things you need to consider. So make sure you're doing your performance testing properly. Even though LWR sites are faster, they could still be slower for your end clients. So some of the things you need to remember is the traffic volumes, your patterns, your authentication versus guest users, your transaction volume, peak volumes for the day, and test it thoroughly before you go on production. And with that, thank you. Any more questions? Yes.
Should I take my Experience Cloud exam tomorrow before this all comes into it?
Yeah, please. Yes, probably a good idea.
Is there would they be, so the old site, the Aura runtime sites, is there going to be a time where they're going to be depreciated and the only thing you can do going forward will be LWR? So
because we haven't reached the feature parity yet, so we are not at that stage, but we would have a proper transition plan once we are at that parity level. And these things will come out in the next few releases. But generally, that's the idea, is that we are moving towards developing LWR platforms because they're much more better when compared to the Aura predecessors.
There's lots of
pre-built Aura sites which are nice starter blocks.
Yes.
Plan to do something like that with WLR?
Yes.
Nice templates that people can spin up very
Good question. So I showed you about the BYO, which is very developer heavy because you need to write a lot of components yourself today. But we do have something called microsite template as well, which is for lead generation. I would read up on the web for the microsite template. We also have one other template, the B2C or the B2B template as well in LWR. So these are the 3 templates available today. But yes, when compared to Aura, fewer but growing.
So our Salesforce team are in the middle of redoing our Experience Cloud, because performance and everything else right now. But they were using the Customer Success Portal or NAPLI or whatever it used to be called template. So what you're saying is probably better to wait the LWR template or start from scratch with the LWR one and build it properly. They're going to have the same performance problems, I think, that they're doing now. So I think we're using the customer portal template.
Yeah. So it's I don't want to say it depends, but make your choices with whatever timelines you have, whatever skill set you have. So if you're and all of the constraints you have on the project, right? So you need this. Sorry.
I don't want to write code for them.
So even if you did decide to write code, I would still write them in LWC components. That way, your transition is going to be much more easier to LWR tomorrow.
It's all standard detail, list of views, web pages,
Yeah.
a few widgets and HTML components. It's all quite basic.
Yeah.
But it's quite slow.
Yeah. Okay. So let's chat about that offline. Yes. Yes. Any other questions? No? Well, thank you very much.